Welcome to Sexpertease. I'm your host and favorite sexpert, Erica Rivera. Quick heads up before we get started, my allergies are putting up a fight today. So if I sound a little stuffy or you catch me sniffling, that's why. But the show must go on, so let's get into it. Over the last couple episodes, we've talked about what I've learned from 2 years of bringing these conversations to television and why adults still have a difficult time talking openly about sex. Today, I want to take that conversation one step further and ask a pretty basic question. Why do we act as though sex education has an expiration date? Most people receive whatever formal sex education they're going to get while they're young. And then they're essentially sent into adulthood expected to figure out the rest. But adulthood brings entirely new relationships, health decisions, changing bodies, new partners, different boundaries, and questions we couldn't possibly have anticipated as teenagers. Our need for accurate information doesn't suddenly disappear because we graduated from high school. So today we're looking at what good sex education for adults should actually look like. Not just anatomy and risk prevention, but communication, consent, pleasure, relationships, changing bodies, media literacy, and the practical information people need throughout their lives, because sexual health is part of lifelong health. Think back to whatever sex education you received growing up. For many people, the focus was primarily on anatomy and also reproduction, pregnancy, and perhaps sexually transmitted infections. Some received comprehensive education, some received abstinence-focused education, and some received almost nothing at all. Even when the information was medically accurate, there were often enormous gaps. We weren't necessarily taught how to tell a partner what we need, how to navigate different levels of desire, how to recognize emotional safety, or what healthy intimacy looks like. Knowing how reproduction works doesn't automatically prepare someone to communicate in an adult relationship. And that's not necessarily a criticism of every teacher or school. There is only so much that can be covered at one stage of life. The bigger problem is assuming that the education should stop there instead of recognizing that different information becomes relevant as we grow. Sexual health information evolves, and sometimes the information people learned years ago was incomplete or simply wrong. Medical recommendations change and terminology changes, new research becomes available, and our understanding of sexual health continues developing. Adults need opportunities to update what they know. We also carry misconceptions into adulthood because once we believe something for long enough, we rarely stop to question where it came from. Maybe you heard something from a friend when you were 16, saw it online years ago, or simply assumed it was true because everyone around you seemed to believe it. Repetition isn't the same thing as accuracy. That's why reliable sources matter. Sexual health decisions can affect our bodies, our relationships, and overall well-being. So we should be comfortable verifying information instead of relying on whoever sounds the most confident. Being an informed adult doesn't mean knowing everything. It means knowing how to find credible answers when you don't. Communication may not be the first thing people picture when they hear sex education, but I would argue it's one of the most important parts. And for those of you that have been watching my show for a while, you know that communication is lubrication. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt someday, I'm telling you. But you can understand anatomy perfectly and still struggle to tell a partner that something doesn't feel right. So, knowledge without communication skills only takes us so far. Healthy sexual communication includes expressing preferences, asking questions, discussing boundaries, listening to a partner, and being able to navigate uncomfortable conversations without immediately becoming defensive. These aren't skills we're magically born knowing. Like any form of communication, they improve with practice. And communication isn't only necessary when there's a problem. Couples can talk about what they enjoy, what has changed, what they want more of, or simply how they're feeling with about intimacy lately. When those conversations become normal, they don't have to feel like an emergency meeting every time they happen. Consent education is sometimes reduced to a very simple message. Yes means yes, and no means no. That's an important foundation, but adult relationships require a much more nuanced understanding. Consent is ongoing communication between people, not a box that we check once. Someone can consent to one activity without consenting to another. They can change their mind. Something they enjoyed yesterday may not feel comfortable today. Being in a relationship, being married, or having consented previously doesn't remove someone's ability to make decisions about their body in the present moment. Healthy consent also means creating an environment where someone genuinely feels safe saying no. If saying no leads to guilt, pressure, anger, manipulation, or punishment, then communication isn't truly free. Good adult sex education should teach us not only how to express our boundaries, but how to respectfully receive someone else's. Pleasure belongs in the conversation. Pleasure is often one of the biggest omissions in traditional sex education. Literally one of the biggest omissions. We talk about what can go wrong, which is important, but rarely discuss why people choose to have sex in the first place. Ignoring pleasure doesn't make it disappear. It just leaves people without language for discussing it responsibly. Understanding your own body can help you communicate more effectively with a partner. People aren't identical, and sorry, my allergies are really bad. It's one thing if you guys are watching because you can see that I'm struggling a little bit, but for those of you that only listen to the audio on Spotify or something, I'm sure the interruption is, yeah, trying hard here. But again, the episode must go on, right? Anyways, where were we? Healthy intimacy requires curiosity, feedback, and the understanding that a partner cannot automatically know your preferences without communication. Including pleasure in sexual health education doesn't mean encouraging anyone to have sex. It means acknowledging reality. We're acknowledging reality and giving sexually active adults tools for healthier experiences. We can talk about pleasure while still talking about consent and protection, boundaries, and responsibility. Sexually transmitted infection education has historically relied heavily on fear. People may remember graphic images, worst case scenarios, or messages that were designed primarily to scare them away from sexual activity. Fear can get someone's attention, but it isn't always the best foundation for lifelong health decisions. Adults need practical information about testing, prevention, transmission, treatment, and how to communicate with partners. They also need to understand that stigma can discourage people from getting tested or disclosing important health information. Shame doesn't prevent infections. Informed behavior is what helps reduce risk. So, healthier conversation treats STI testing as part of sexual health care rather than evidence that someone has done something wrong. Being willing to discuss testing with a partner can be an act of mutual care. Sexual health becomes easier to manage when we're able to approach it with responsibility instead of humiliation, basically. So, contraception is that's another area where adult education matters because people's needs and circumstances change. There are multiple methods with different benefits, risks, effectiveness rates, and practical considerations. So, what works well for one person may not be appropriate for someone else. Reproductive responsibility also shouldn't automatically fall on one partner. When pregnancy is possible, healthy communication means discussing contraception, pregnancy intentions, and what both people understand about the method that they're relying on. Assumptions are not a substitute for actual conversation. And circumstances evolve. Someone's health may change. They may decide they want children, they may decide they don't, or a method that once worked may no longer be appropriate. Adult sexual health education should give people enough information to have informed conversations with both their partners and their healthcare providers. Now, I don't think that we can teach sexual health responsibly without talking about relationships. Not because everyone needs to be in a romantic relationship to have healthy sexuality, but because emotional safety, communication, boundaries, and interpersonal dynamics affect so many sexual experiences. Someone may know how to use protection and still struggle to recognize manipulation. They may understand consent in theory, but feel afraid to establish a boundary with a particular partner. That's why relationship skills and sexual health skills overlap so often. Healthy relationships don't require perfection, but they should allow room for honesty, respect, individuality, and repair. Understanding the difference between chemistry and compatibility, or between intensity and emotional safety, can be just as valuable to someone's sexual being as understanding anatomy. And speaking of that, our bodies don't remain frozen at the age when we first learned about them. Hormones change. People experience pregnancy or menopause. They experience illness, disability, medication changes, surgeries, stress, and aging. Any of those things can influence sexuality and sexual functioning. Sometimes Sometimes people interpret a physical change as evidence that something is wrong with them because nobody ever told them that sexual experiences can evolve throughout adulthood. Maybe desire changes, arousal works differently, or something that was once comfortable, it just no longer feels the same. Those changes deserve curiosity rather than immediate shame. This is also where healthcare matters. Not every sexual concern should simply be accepted as getting older. And some changes deserve a conversation with a qualified medical professional. Good education helps people recognize both what's normal variation and when it's appropriate to seek additional support. I may need another tissue. It's okay. So, sexuality doesn't have an expiration date. We also need to challenge the idea that sexuality belongs primarily to young adults. Like I mentioned earlier about blaming everything on aging, that's just one of my pet peeves. Sex is not supposed to only be enjoyed when we're young. Older adults continue to have relationships. They experience attraction, they date, they form new partnerships, and they make sexual health decisions. Aging doesn't automatically erase sexuality. In fact, different stages of adulthood can create entirely new educational needs. Someone dating someone dating after divorce, or the death of a longtime partner may be navigating STI conversations or modern dating for the first time in decades. So their questions aren't less important because they're older. Sexual health education across the lifespan recognizes that people remain whole human beings as they age. Their bodies may change, their priorities may evolve, but they still deserve accurate information, healthcare, respect, and the freedom to make informed decisions. Today, adults have more access to sexual information than perhaps any generation before us, but access doesn't guarantee accuracy. Pornography, social media, podcasts, influencers, anonymous forums, and artificial intelligence. AI can all provide information that ranges from excellent to completely false. So, pornography in particular can influence expectations when people use it as education rather than entertainment. Pornography is entertainment. Bodies, reactions, pacing, communication, and sexual behavior shown on screen may be designed for the viewer rather than representing everyday intimacy. Entertainment doesn't have an obligation to function like a classroom. The same skepticism should apply to social media. A viral video doesn't automatically medic a viral video isn't automatically medically accurate because it received a million views. Adult sex education should include media literacy so people know how to evaluate sources, recognize misinformation, and verify claims before making decisions about their own health. One of the most freeing things sexual health education can teach adults is that there isn't one correct way every healthy sex life has to look. People differ in desire, frequency, preferences, relationship structures, boundaries, and what intimacy means to them. Difference doesn't automatically mean dysfunction. Comparison can create unnecessary anxiety. Someone hears how frequently another couple has sex or sees a relationship portrayed online and suddenly wonders whether they're doing something wrong. But another person's relationship isn't a measuring stick for yours. Instead, focus on whether the people involved are informed, consenting. We don't know. We don't know if they're informed or consenting. Focus on whether they're respected and genuinely comfortable with their choices. Healthy sexuality is much more about communication and well being than meeting an arbitrary standard of what everyone else supposedly does. So, what should good adult sex education actually look like? First, it should be accurate. People deserve information grounded in credible evidence rather than fear, myths, or personal opinion presented as universal fact. It should also be inclusive and practical. Adults have different bodies, identities, relationships, abilities, backgrounds, and experiences, and useful education needs to recognize that diversity. At the same time, information should give people tools they can actually use in real conversations and real life decisions. And finally, it should be shame free. Shame doesn't make people healthier. It really doesn't. It often makes them quieter. Good education allows us to discuss risk honestly while still treating people with dignity because people are much more likely to ask questions and seek help when they know they won't be humiliated for doing so. Sex education shouldn't be something we receive once and then leave behind. Our bodies change, our relationships evolve, new information becomes available, and different questions become relevant throughout our lives. Being willing to keep learning isn't evidence that we failed to learn enough before. It's part of taking responsibility for our health. If there's something you've always wanted to address on Sexpertease, send me your questions or topic suggestions. My email's on the screen. Some of the most valuable conversations begin with a question someone was nervous to ask. And chances are, if you've wondered about it, somebody else has too. If your company, organization, or brand believes in accessible, shame free sexual health education, Sexpertease is also currently welcoming sponsors to help keep this programming on the air. So reach out to request the sponsorship deck and learn how you can support the show. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop learning about the body, relationships, and the life that you are actually living.